Right,
I know it's holding you up, but that's not
right. Okay, John, we're good. We're late, so as soon as you can get us going, we'll go. Yep, okay. Good evening. Welcome to our first we're going to do tonight. We've got two quick meetings we need to take care of. Are we going to, do we have to stop and are we just going to go right through it? Okay. So we have two quick meetings we need to handle, and then we'll get into our regular meeting. So we'll call to order our Community Development and Renewal Agency of Herriman meeting tonight. Item 1.1, look for a motion for review and outline of the finalization process to approve the minutes of January 25th, 2023.
Motion to have the minutes of January 25th, 2023 be prepared and distributed to each member of the redevelopment agency board. The board will have 10 days to review the minutes and submit any changes to the secretary. If after 10 days there are no changes, the minutes will stand approved. If there are changes, the process will be followed until all changes are made and the board is in agreement.
Second.
Motion by Jared, second by Sherry. All in favor?
Aye.
Item 2.1, public hearing, consideration of a resolution of the CDRA of Herriman to adopt budget amendments for the fiscal year. Kyle. So we're gonna have
Thank you, Board Chair. This will be a really quick one. So there's really only one amendment being proposed. Oh, thank you. I probably don't even need to turn it on. It's fairly quick. So this is just an amendment to satisfy our agreement with some property owners in the Auto Mall area utilizing sales tax. There is an interlocal agreement already with the city, between the city and the renewal agency to cover this. So this is just setting the budget for that agreement. Are there any questions before the public hearing on this?
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Kyle. We will open for public comment on this item. Seeing none, we will look for a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Motion by Sherry,
Second.
second by Steve. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any discussion? Okay, look for a motion to,
Motion to approve resolution number R 2023-01, approving an amendment to the 2022-2023 fiscal year budget.
motion by Steve, second by Jared. Jared?
Yes.
Teddy?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Look for a motion to adjourn.
So
So
moved.
moved. Second.
So moved by Sherry, second by Steve. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the next meeting, the Herriman City Safety Enforcement Area Meeting. Look for a motion, item 1.1, for finalization process to approve the minutes.
Your turn, Sherry.
Motion to have the minutes of January 25th, 2023 be prepared and distributed to each member of the HCSEA board. The board will have 10 days to review the minutes and submit any changes to the secretary. If after 10 days there are no changes, the minutes will stand approved. If there are changes, the process will be followed until all changes are made and the board is in agreement.
Second.
Motion by Sherry, second by Teddy. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, public hearing on the resolution to approve the proposed amendments. Kyle?
Thank you. This hasn't changed since we discussed it last meeting. There's a few adjustments that need to be made to the safety enforcement area. One is staff has done a thorough analysis of the budget that was put into place for the property tax levy revenue we were expecting to receive. So that is roughly a $460,000 adjustment. In addition, as we had discussed, there are a few items in the police department budget which HCSEA contracts with to provide police services to Herriman. The most significant of those were an Axon Taser contract was left out of the original 2023 budget. In addition, as we've discussed, vehicle prices have gone up, and in addition, approximately $455,000 of vehicles budgeted in 2024 are scheduled to be purchased in 2023. So what this means is an additional transfer to the general fund to pay those increased costs of $783,000. In addition, recognizing that there's a decrease in property tax revenue budgeted would mean using approximately $1 million of fund balance. As you can see at the bottom, that does leave the safety enforcement area with a fund balance of about $276,000. I would like to note a couple of things. One is we are getting ready to surplus some vehicles in the police department, so that those numbers aren't budgeted in the general fund because we don't exactly know how much we're going to receive for those. And in addition, any savings that the police department realizes during the year, because ideally the police department won't spend their entire expense budget, we will adjust the transfer between the general fund and the HCSEA, so the safety enforcement area could see some funds coming back at the end of the year once everything is accounted for. Are there any questions before the public hearing? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. Okay, we will open the public hearing. See no comments, I'll look for a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Motion by Jared,
Second.
second by Teddy, all in favor?
Aye.
Roll call.
No, that's on the action.
Next
Oh,
one.
sorry.
To approve, motion to approve then.
Motion approved resolution number R23-01, approving an amendment to the 2002-2023 fiscal year budget.
Second.
By Jared, second by Steve. Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Teddy?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Motion to adjourn that meeting.
So moved.
Motion by Jared.
Second.
Second by Sherry, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, last one, Herriman City Fire Safety Area Agenda meeting. Look for a motion to review the finalization process.
All right. I'll make a motion to have the minutes of January 25th, 2023 be prepared and distributed to each member of the HCFSA Board. The board will have 10 days to review the minutes and submit any changes to the secretary. If after 10 days there are no changes, the minutes will stand approved. If there are changes, the process will be followed until all changes are made and the board is in agreement.
Second.
Second by Teddy, all in favor?
Aye.
Second by Steve, sorry. Look for a motion to approve previous minutes, approved and corrected.
So moved.
Motion by Sherry,
Second.
second by Jared, all in favor?
Aye.
Public hearing and consideration of the resolution to approve the fiscal year budget. Kyle?
Thank you. This proposed adjustment deals with 3 items. The first one is, as we had discussed at the prior meeting, what the Salt Lake County did was, since the service area set a tax rate in August, we had been receiving estimated property tax distributions from January to September or August when the rate was adopted. The county goes back and actually recalculates the amount. So what happened was the general fund ended up showing a decrease because we had reduced the general property tax levy, and then the fire safety area had an increase in levy. Because this spans fiscal years, the fire service area needs to reimburse the general fund for the amounts the general fund had transferred over to the fire service area. In addition, 2 items had been left out of the original budget. One was building grounds maintenance for the existing fire stations, and the second one was professional fees for continued design of the Station 103 planned replacement. Are there any questions before the public hearing for me? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. Okay, open the public hearing. See no comment, look for a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Motion by Steve, second by Jared, all in favor?
Aye.
Look for a motion to approve the resolution.
Motion to approve resolution number R01-23, approving an amendment to the 2022-2023 fiscal year budget.
Second.
Motion by Steve, second by Jared. Jared.
Yes.
Teddy.
Yes.
Sherry.
Yes.
Steve.
Yes.
And I vote yes. Look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Steve, second by Sherry. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Moving to our regular city council meeting. We want them to come in,
Can we do this one that quick as well?
or do we want them to,
don't
do they
have
want to
to.
wait? No, it's not up to us. Just say, do they want to wait for their part?
They're a little rowdy, I guess, right?
We like rowdy. It's better than quiet.
Unless they're doing the flag.
No, but
We need Zach for that.
Zach's in here for the.
We need Zach for a pledge, yeah. I don't know if they were doing the honor guard. Doesn't look like it. Zach's just gonna do the pledge. Okay,
I think we need a new state flag for the,
stop. I came here to get a break from that conversation. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start our city council meeting. Welcome everybody tonight. We are going to have a pledge of allegiance now by Commander Zach Adams.
Right.
Repeat the pledge after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Okay, we'll move on to item 4.2, city council comments and recognitions. Anything from the council tonight? Seeing none, we will move on to item 5, public comment. Audience members may bring any item to the city council's attention. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes. State law prohibits the council from acting on items that do not appear on the agenda. Public comments for this meeting will also be conducted electronically. Any person interested in addressing the council may submit a comment by emailing recorder@herriman.org or by visiting herriman.org/agendas and minutes, where there is a link to fill out an online public comment form. Your statement will be incorporated into the record. So at this point, I'll open it for public comment, if anybody is here to make a public comment. Okay, seeing none tonight, we will move on to item 6. Item 6, we'll look at city council reports. Jared, anything tonight?
Nope.
Teddy, anything tonight?
Yeah, so we had a couple meetings. The sewer board, we had our annual update on our audit, and we have over 1,000 miles of sewer pipe in our district, and we have 92,000 connections. We have 2,900 units ready for sewer. That's building permits in the process. And we only had one sanitary backup, and so for the district, our size is pretty significant. And then we also had our public meeting training, so I don't have to do that again, Jackie. So that was the sewer board meetings that we meet monthly with. Then we had our audit committee that we just had actually this evening before these meetings, and we'll have a report on that as well. But we're sitting in pretty good hands, so that's it.
Thank you. Sherry,
I might just
anything?
have, we had our Wasatch Front Waste and Recycling District meeting. Things are good there. Still struggling getting garbage trucks, the same as every other entity struggling getting trucks. The budget's good. We're grateful for the new fee increase that was implemented this month. That will come out in the quarterly bills, but it was necessary and very much appreciated. The cost of recycling is staggering right now. We went from about $10, and now we're up to close to $100 a ton on recycling. So hopefully that will be volatile and it will come back down, but if it doesn't, then we're going to have to take a hard look at if we can afford to continue the program. And then as far as the scrap program, which is the program where we bring containers to the home, we'll continue like we have in the last 2 years. You'll get a postcard in the mail a couple of weeks before it's time to sign up. Get right on it, because there will be not enough containers for everyone that wants one, but it's just the nature of getting enough drivers. We just simply can't. So we'll try and get 60 containers per day in the city during the time it's our allotted time, and then each resident will be in charge of having that particular container on their property. And if you want to share with your neighbors, please reach out and share, because the containers are being underfilled. We're only averaging about a ton in a container, and they can hold about 4 tons. So share with your neighbors, even though it's on your property. If you can chat with your neighbors and see if they can get those containers full while they're on the property, that would be
Put your
benefit.
part in first.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the scrap program.
Perfect. Steve?
Well, I'll skip a couple of the other ones, but I think of public interest would be the meeting we had recently with the Broadband Infrastructure Committee, talking about how we can move forward. And we had to kind of discuss some of our assumptions a little bit and get some clarification on some things. But we are moving forward to define some of the scope of the project, some high-level design elements, so that we can move forward with finding out what the bond parameters and proceeds would be and costs would be, so that we can find out if we can construct such a network. But based on all the information we discussed today, we're pretty optimistic and pretty excited. We hope to be able to bring that information back to the council here within 30 days or so, and hopefully get this moving.
Love it. Okay, just real quick, I attended the first COG of the year. With the first COG usually comes new committee assignments. I was nominated to be now on the COG Public Works Committee within the county, so that's a committee that meets to allocate funds along those lines to the different communities. So been nominated to kind of represent this corner of the valley and hopefully bring some of that funding here. And then I also attend, this is a new one, this is only my second time I've attended this, but I've been asked to participate in what they're calling the South Valley Interfaith Coalition, which is really cool. It's a group of many denominations get together with the other mayors from the South Valley, Mayor Walker and Draper, Mayor Holland, Bluffdale, Mayor Staggs, Mayor Ramsey. We were all there this week and talked about how we could assist our communities. And it came up during the holidays that right here in Herriman, I did not know this, but even Athlos, the charter school, they are 1% away from being a Title I school. I think when we think of Herriman, we think we're very well off, fortunate, which we are. We're a very fortunate community, but there's a lot of need in our community as well. So as I mentioned that, there's going to start being some coordination efforts to have some sort of kind of a food pantry or food bank, kind of based probably out of Athlos with the support of the multiple denominations. They're all going to kind of step in and kind of help once a week at their food pantry. So all the communities are going to jump in, even some outside the area, just even because Bluffdale, the closest pickup right now is not close, right? So hopefully that'll be a benefit to the community that will come from outside the city. It won't take staff resources, but I think it's going to be a great benefit to the city. So just wanted to update on that. So I thought it was pretty cool. That being said, we'll move on to the best part of the night here. Item 8.1, Herriman Police Department badge presentation. Cody.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for allowing us to take some of your time this evening. When we talk about badge pinnings, and many of you have heard us talk about this before, we do this at least once a year and like to memorialize those members of our department who are either new to our family or have been newly promoted to new responsibilities within the department. For us, the pinning of the badge is a very important ceremonial tradition in law enforcement, as we recognize the badge as an outward symbol of public trust. And so we use ceremony to memorialize that when it's passed to us for the first time. And as is common practice, and we'll see tonight, our badge is traditionally pinned by a member of the officer's family in recognition of the sacrifice and support that's provided to us by those members of our family and our loved ones. So with your permission, Mayor, I'd actually ask the council to come down and we'll do the pinning one at a time, and that way we can take photographs as we're going instead of having to do a bunch at the end, if that's okay. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, you guys want to pre-stage for the photo, it'll make it go quicker. So we've been told that we talk a lot, so looking for ways to save time. No. We're going to start with Commander Adamson. You certainly should, and anybody else who, unless you're going to pin it yourself, or anyone else you want in your photograph ought to come up with you. Right up to the front there. Yeah, we don't know anybody named Commander Adamson. His name's BA. BA is, 35, 40, 45? How long you been a cop, BA? 33 years. Veteran of law enforcement, Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office, Unified Police Department, with a short stint at UTA. BA was actually the very first sergeant promoted in our department way back in the early days, and has another distinction of being the first member of the Herriman Police Department to have been promoted twice within our department. So BA is our newest commander, yeah, and is going to be pinned by his wife, Pam. Dan, if you want to make your way up here. Sergeant Corey Tesaurus was also promoted in 2022. He couldn't be here tonight because of a family obligation, but we'll embarrass him at another time. Sergeant Dan Beckstrom was promoted in August. Dan has 16 years law enforcement experience, starting with Pleasant Grove PD, where he served for 10 years before going to the Unified Police Department. He came over with us as one of our founding members in 2018. And has served in patrol, special victims, motors, and is a drug recognition expert, and will be pinned by his wife, Debbie, and his daughters, at least one of them's here somewhere. Oh. Dan enjoys spending time with his family and going on camping trips. Natalie, you're next. Officer Natalie Chinea, who you've also met before, actually was one of our court services officers. So she decided she wanted to become a full-time patrol officer and completed her training in the police academy, was hired as a full-time officer in March. She has just over a year experience here at Herriman PD and is one of our bilingual officers. With her Colombian roots, she helps us bridge the cultural gaps in our community. She's originally from New Jersey, and she'll be pinned tonight by her husband, David, with her 5-year-old daughter and 3-year-old son. She loves police work, and she still shows up every day, so.
Watching her get sprayed in the face, and she goes, this is uncomfortable. I don't like it. I'd have been screaming on the ground. She's the toughest person I've ever seen, so well done.
Renan, you're up. Officer Renan Aruda has 4 years of experience as a police officer. He came to us from the South Salt Lake Police Department. He's a native of Brazil and has some language skills in both Portuguese and Spanish. He's a defensive tactics instructor for us. He practices Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Also somebody you don't want to pick a fight with. And he is one of our motor officers. He's a master of Brazilian barbecue, which I didn't know, but I'm anxious to try now. He's being pinned tonight by his daughters, Aria and Laura, accompanied by his wife, Jacqueline. Oh, is he? Oh, Alex is back. Alex went on a call, so we skipped him for a minute. Alex, you're up, bud. Officer Alex Felsing is a 7.5-year law enforcement officer, came to us from the Provo Police Department, originally from Sandy. He's a SWAT officer, sniper, field training officer, and is certified as an explosive ordnance detection expert. I don't know what SET means, but he's been a task force officer too. Can't put acronyms in here that I don't know, Josh. And Alex is one of our premier firearms instructors and experts. He's a very talented guitarist and loves to shred to Ozzy. Rock on. Officer Brett Barrett came to us in August, has 7 years of experience, and comes to us from the Orem Police Department. He has 4 kids, an 11-year-old daughter, twin 10-year-old daughters, and a 6-year-old son. Originally from Las Vegas, Nevada. He's worked in patrol, major crimes task force officer, and is a field training officer. He currently serves on our SWAT team and is being pinned tonight by his girlfriend, Madison. He's a hard worker, and we're certainly better off for having him as part of our HPD family. Officer Ben Rugebrecht, if you're a German speaker, then you actually know how to pronounce his last name. We just call him Ruger. Has been a police officer for 7 years, also comes to us from the Provo Police Department, where he served as patrol officer, bicycle officer, and a detective. He's currently working as a patrol officer for us, but he's a defensive tactics instructor and serves on our SWAT team. He's also a current member of the Utah National Guard in his 9th year as a warrant officer, and is originally from Corvallis, Oregon. Go Beavers. He's being pinned tonight by his wife, Alicia, and they recently, very recently, added to their family with a beautiful baby girl. Ben enjoys anything that gets him off the ground and flying the skies, and he's training to be a pilot with the National Guard. Officer Isaac Asiata comes to us from the Provo Police Department as a 3-year veteran of law enforcement, served in patrol, and is currently on a temporary duty assignment, fulfilling his goal of being a school resource officer at Herriman High School. He's from Spanish Fork, and prior to becoming into his law enforcement career, he played football for the University of Utah, the Miami Dolphins, and Buffalo Bills. He's being pinned tonight by his wife Angel and has a 4-year-old daughter and 2 sons, ages 2 and 1.
Take 2 or 3 or 4.
And last but certainly not least, Felicia Diedrichson started originally with Herriman City in the finance division, and we were able to poach her away from Kyle. Sorry, Kyle. And she works now as a records technician for us in our support services unit. She's being pinned tonight by her husband, DJ. Has a 16-year-old son, a 13-year-old daughter. She's a lot of fun to have in the office, and she enjoys the best coffee around and brings gourmet coffee in for us. So instantly, all the cops loved her. Now, Felicia, you have to stay there. If we could have all of our PIN members come back up, we're going to take a group photo. We're going to take one more big group photograph, and then you guys can go back and sit down, and Jackie's going to swear at them. I mean, swear them in. Sorry, Jackie. Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
This is the only angle we can fit everyone, so.
Jackie, all yours.
So we can just end it now on the high note, right?
That's right, that's right.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Welcome to all of you, the new ones. Congratulations on those promotions. We appreciate your service to this community. To your families, thank you. I know sometimes you're behind the scenes, but truly thank you to your families for supporting them. We have the best police department in the state of Utah and the country, and they're very, welcome to this department, welcome to this community. where we support and believe in you. So we're truly fortunate to have all of you here, so thank you, and thank you for this. So.
And when is that barbecue?
Mr. Mayor, I think it would be okay if you let some of these moms and dads take some people out to get some treats. It sounds like they're
Yes.
ready to get some going over there.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you for being here, and feel free to, thank you so much.
Yeah, I love that. Dad, can we get a treat?
Yeah,
They brought.
everybody's cursing you now.
That's awesome.
Okay, we're going to move on to item 8.2 while they're leaving, presentation of the audited financial statements. Kyle,
He's got 2 minutes, right?
2 minutes.
He brought badges for everybody as well.
They're stickers.
Yeah,
Right. Honorary
honorary
accountant.
CFO,
Yeah, exactly.
It's a disadvantage to you to have to
No,
follow that.
I don't take offense to it. It's actually comforting when the room clears out before I get up to speak. Then I don't get too nervous.
Like I told Justin last time, we're not taking a picture.
Just really briefly, as you probably know, but there might be public listening, we're required by state law to have an audit every year. That audit has to be completed by December 31st. The city hired the firm of Hinton Burdick to complete that audit, and I will turn the time over to McKay Hall, who is the CPA partner that was over the audit.
Thank you, Kyle. And thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here presenting to you this evening. Though I don't usually enjoy being in front of a group of people, I am grateful for the opportunity. By way of context as to the nature of this presentation, we brought some new staff on. Tax season starting up. Our firm brought on some new staff. They went through a few days' worth of training. And one of the comments that came back after that training was, it would be nice if the presenter was a little more dynamic. Just so that you know, Ben Stein from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, if you remember that movie, that's the goal I'm shooting for in the level of dynamic that I present. So,
Our main criteria is the clock.
fair enough.
I don't care
As
how
I-
entertaining it is.
As I go through, if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know, and I'll share any information that we have. As we go through, there will be just a couple of sections. I'll go through what it is that we do as the auditors. I'll touch on one or two key financial indicators to watch, and then we'll take a look at some 5-year trends over some of those key indicators. Financial audit. When we come in and perform a financial audit, our objectives are to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatement. Misstatements are considered material if there is a substantial likelihood that individually or in aggregate they would influence the judgment made by a reasonable user based on the financial statements. And when we conduct this financial audit, we conduct it with the standards that are generally accepted, the auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America. And as a governmental organization, we are also following the standards applicable to financial audits, as those standards are contained in the governmental auditing standards issued by the Comptroller General of the United States. When we come in to perform the audit, we take a look at internal controls. Financial audits are not meant to audit the internal controls, the processes and procedures you have in place. But in order to gain an understanding of the financial activity for the city, we have to have an understanding of what your controls are, what your processes and procedures are. And if we see any weaknesses, if there's a high likelihood that there could be a misstatement that gets processed through and into the system without being caught in the normal course of business, normal course of operations, that is a material misstatement, as we were just talking about on that previous slide. So when we come in, we look to gain an understanding of those internal controls, and we look to see if they appear to be operating as they're designed, their operating effectiveness. We then use that information to go through and take a look at the information that's contained in the financial statements that come to you. We take that information, we follow it through the accounting system and back to the original documentation. We have various tests and analytics that we perform. We reach out to external parties for confirmations, and we also tie that information back to the supporting documentation. So in broad strokes, that's what we do when we perform the financial audit. In the course of that audit, if we find any of those material misstatements I was talking about, we'll communicate those to management and to you as the council, those who are charged with governance. Any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies are communicated to you. There's a finding and recommendations letter that comes as part of that audit. There are also sometimes some smaller items which are just kind of a heads up for management, and there's an other items letter that's provided to management as part of what we do as well. The deliverables, so to speak, the reports that come out of the audit, the first one is the independent auditor's report, and that's the financial audit report as to whether or not your financial statements appear to be reasonably and materially correct. Can you as a council take that information and use it to make your decisions? If that's the case, then we issue an unmodified or a clean opinion. And we're happy to note that that is the opinion that's being issued this year. Based on our test work, the information in your financial statements is materially correct and reasonably stated. And so you as a council can rely upon that information. Another report that's part of it is this report on compliance and on internal controls over financial reporting. When we find material misstatements or significant deficiencies, those findings are listed in that report on compliance, and that can be found on pages 142 and 143 of your annual comprehensive financial report. There's also a state compliance report found on pages 144 and 145 of this year's annual comprehensive financial report, your statements. And we're happy to note that there's an unmodified or a clean opinion there as well. There were no material findings in the course of the audit. Probably the biggest key indicator to watch over time is the net position, the fund balance of the city. That's the equivalent of the equity. If you were a private business, that would be your equity. Net position are the resources that you have available. If you took all of your assets and you paid off all your liabilities, your net position is what you'd have left in order to meet your current and ongoing obligations. So it's an important number to watch. Over time, that number increasing, decreasing, that can give you an indication of the health of the city. If it remains reasonably consistent, if it's growing in line with typical inflation, you know, that's a pretty good, healthy place to be, staying consistent, growing. If it's decreasing over time, then that could be an indication that you could run short of resources and you might find yourself in a pinch at some time in the future. So it's an important number to watch. It'll fluctuate up and down in any given year, but over time you want to follow that trend to see if, you know, on the graph, is it trending northeasterly? Is it increasing over time? The total net position or the equity for the city for the year ended June 30, 2022 was $553 million. There's some more information on exactly how you get to that number on page 33 in your financial statements. The change from the prior year was an increase of $30.6 million. That information's on page 34. That gives you your revenues, your expenses, and how that $30 million came about to be. If you break that out between your governmental activities and your business type activities, the governmental activities increased by $26.8 million. Your business type activities increased by $3.8 million. Another thing to watch is the classification of that net position. Of that $553 million that the city has, $466 million is invested in capital assets, net of any related debt. Restricted amounts are $28 million and unrestricted are $58 million. Those are important to watch because at first blush, if you take a look at $553 million, you may think, wow, we're flush with resources. But $466 million of that is tied up in your capital assets, your buildings, your roads, your infrastructure. And so that's not really convertible over to cash. Its use for meeting current and future obligations is limited. You don't have a lot of flexibility because those are tied up in capital assets. Restricted amounts are coming about because of generally externally imposed restrictions. Grants, things like that. You'll have resources that have to be used for specific purposes. And so your ability to use those funds is somewhat limited. So it's important to watch those. The unrestricted, the $58.5 million, there in the last one in that list. Those are the resources that you have basically at the drop of a hat to meet any obligation that you have. So those are important numbers to watch over time. If your unrestricted net position is decreasing over time, even though your total net position may be increasing, you still could find yourself in a pinch. So just keep an eye on those. To look at the 5-year trends, we'll start with the general fund. That's your main operating fund. Taking a look over the last 5 years, we've got the 3 items that we're tracking in this graph: the total assets, total liabilities, and total fund equity. As you can see, the total assets was trending up from 2018. It took a little bit of a decrease in 2021, but it's coming back up in 2022. If you look at that, the net position, the total fund equity, is that line across the bottom. It was remaining pretty consistent in 2018 through 2020. And so the reason your assets were increasing is because your liabilities were also increasing. If you look those first 3 years in the graph, the liabilities and the assets were trending together. And then in 21, the liability came down, which brought down that asset number. The difference with 22 as the assets go back up is that your fund equity is increasing there, which means that it's bringing in more resources for you to be able to meet your obligations, be able to deal with any hiccups or bumps that you run across. You've got more resources to be able to do that. Restricted cash, unrestricted cash in the general fund, it's important to watch that as well. As you take a look, the unrestricted cash is that line across the top. It follows basically that same asset line that we were watching on the last graph. This year, there were some restricted cash come in and increase, which has to do with grants and certain things that have put some restrictions on that cash. So the increase in cash from the 5.7 million last year to the 11.6 this year is really the result of operations and transfers. The revenues and expenditures in the general fund. As a city, your goal is not to make a profit. And so over time, you'd expect the general fund as your main operating fund to break even. You'd expect about as many years where expenses are over revenues, revenues over expenses. And as you follow this 5-year trend, you can see that is the case. That line with the boxes is the expenditures, and the line with the diamond is the revenues. If you take a look at it, 2 of the last 5 years, the revenues exceeded the expenditures. In two of the years, the expenditures exceeded the revenues. And in that 5th year, they were pretty close to break even. So that's the kind of activity, the nature, the trend that we expect to see in a fund like that. Looking at a couple of the significant revenues, the sales tax revenue has become one of the most significant revenues for the city. As you take a look, in 2018, the sales tax revenue was $4.6 million. At the end of 2022, it was $11.5 million. So that's been increasing for the city, which is good. Historically, Herriman's had quite a bit of one-time funding coming in related to permits and various licenses and the like. The sales tax revenue is a little more consistent revenue year to year, depending on the sales activity, but it's good to see that number trending up for the city. Along the same lines, if you look at the license and permits number, the one with the boxes, that has been coming down over the last 5 years, which is expected. As the population grows and there's an influx of people, those licenses and permits increase, and then as that starts to slow down, it naturally begins to decrease over time. Charges for service has remained pretty consistent over the last 5 years. In fact, there was less than a 1% change between 2021 and 22. A few other significant revenues. That line with the diamond is intergovernmental revenues. We expect those to go up and down just depending on what grants and projects are going on. The increase in 21 and 22 is related to COVID grants and activity there, funding. The line with the diamond is property taxes. As you can see, it's remained fairly consistent compared to the other revenues, though it has been increasing over the last 5 years. And then the franchise taxes are the same. Those have remained relatively consistent, but they have been growing over the last 5 years. The Safety Enforcement Fund, was started in fiscal year 2019. As you can see, the revenues and the expenditures have remained fairly consistent there over the 5 years, which is what we typically expect to see. The Herriman City Fire Service area began in fiscal year 21. As you can see, it's had revenues and expenses increasing due to its start of operations. Over time, we expect to see that begin to level out a little more. The town center, CDRA, as you take a look, once again, over time, we'd expect these to break even. If you take a look at 2018, and if you were to go back to years preceding that, there were expenditures in excess of revenues in those years. The last 4 years, the revenues have actually exceeded the expenditures there. The Capital Projects Fund is an interesting one. This is, in a Capital Projects Fund, you normally see inflows coming in so that you can build up resources to pay for large capital projects. And then in a few years, you'll see large capital expenditures well above and beyond the revenues that come in. In the last 5 years, the Capital Projects Fund here has had significant expenditures above its revenues. In fiscal year 21, that did flip just a little bit, and the revenues were a bit higher than expenditures. But this would be a fund that you'd want to watch over time to make sure that you've got enough resources in there to cover the expenditures. And then the revenues and expenditures in the Water Fund. As a proprietary fund, a business type activity, this one should be turning a profit in its operations. If you don't, then you don't have the resources that you need to replace the infrastructure. And so it really should be turning a profit. If you look at the operations over the last 5 years, though, in each of the 5 years, the expenditures have exceeded the revenues. So there have been transfers and a few other things that have made it such that you don't have a deficit in the fund, but long term, you can't sustain a business type fund that doesn't turn some sort of an operating profit. And so that's one that you're going to want to keep an eye on and see what you need to do in order to get that trend adjusted so that you can get the resources that you need to replace the infrastructure as it ages out. I'm not sure I've hit my Ben Stein goal, but I'm trying hard. Are there any questions? You're always welcome to reach out anytime, day or night. Like I've said before, if you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning with that burning question about the audit, you're always welcome to reach out. If you happen to reach out at 2 in the morning, I may not be real coherent, but you're welcome to reach out.
McKay, if I could just summarize a little bit from our meeting before the
Yes.
meeting tonight. At least my takeaways were that the city's financials are largely materially right. They accurately represent what's going on. There have been some adjustments on some specific line items that are going to be broken out going forward that will just add a little more clarity and transparency to some of those things. But all in all, we've been doing a good job up to this point. It looks like we're continuing to do a good job. I'll also note, because this isn't the first time I've heard somebody make this comment, that a vote of confidence for Kyle, the good work that he's doing, that we're in good hands, and a very optimistic look for where we're headed for our future financial reporting. And I appreciated that comment a lot.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think you're well positioned. If you look at the information through there, your resources are at a place where you can, I think you've got a bright future if you're judicious in how you move forward. That's just my own personal opinion. But yeah, and I think you've, based on my interaction, I think you've got some good people in good places. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it, McKay. Thank you so much.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you very much.
I wasn't even that bored.
Oh, thank you.
Good job. Now, we had some good information in the packet too for good review, so we understood exactly what, not necessarily findings, but good places to adjust. And I think that there's some good internal controls that have been adjusted to make sure that we're in compliance. So thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item 9.1. We'll have a public hearing tonight on a resolution approving amendments to the Herriman City fiscal year 2023 budget. We'll start with Kyle.
Thank you, Mayor. You guys are going to be financed out by the time this evening's over. Due to the essence of time, and we did discuss these amendments last week, I'm just going to hit some of the major highlights, and of course you can ask questions as we go along. First thing I would like to discuss is there's a large carryover number that's being proposed. So what this is projects and items that were started last year but weren't necessarily finished. To give you a good example, our road repair budget was completed in fiscal year 23. Our fiscal year starts in July. The work had started the prior year but didn't finish till this fiscal year, so we didn't actually pay those invoices out until this fiscal year. So that of the 1.6 is over 900,000. In addition, as you've heard many times, probably to the point you're sick of us as staff talking about it, we've had some significant delays with vehicle purchases. A lot of that carryover is to cover the vehicle purchases that are required. As I've mentioned before, prices have also gone up, so this would allocate additional fund balance to cover those price increases. And then we've also tried to be proactive as staff and look at what fiscal year 24 budgeted purchases for vehicles we can make now, though that we have allocations with the vehicle manufacturers for that. At the bottom, I do want to note, as McKay had mentioned, our fund balance. So if you take into account those carryovers and the other uses of fund balance, we still have about 6.1 million in our general fund balance. And this is what we expect to have at the end of the year, which is 21% of revenues. That's the guide the state looks at to see if we're in compliance. Looking at the uses side, so that was looking at where the money's coming from. This is where it's going. As you can see, that crack seal, chip seal carryover was 935,000. Vehicle carryovers were about 680,000. In addition, as we just had to see the renewal agency meeting, so this is the other side, transferring that 25,000 to meet that obligation over to the renewal area fund. In addition, and I did mention this during the discussion 2 weeks ago, but I think it is important to note that primarily police services are funded through the safety enforcement area, animal services, community enforcement are funded through the general fund. The police department had changed a vehicle allocation that was allocated for police to animal services that wasn't in the budget. So this transfer of 99,500 is to cover that vehicle that now is animal services versus police. And then there was also a price increase with a community services vehicle. So that's essentially the general fund as quickly as I can do it. We title this Public Safety Fund. It really is part of the general fund, but for accounting purposes, we do keep it separate. We try to keep the accounting separate where police is being funded mostly by the service area. As you can see, and we discussed this during the HCSEA meeting about some of the adjustments that were needed. We did a thorough analysis as staff on their revenues, and there were some adjustments that needed to be made to be more in line with what they were expecting to receive. We also had some grants budgeted that the police department weren't actually awarded or were the incorrect amounts, so that's an adjustment for that. As we'll get on the uses side, because of some of the items that need to be adjusted in the police department, that requires additional funding from the safety enforcement area. In addition, we did have some vehicles from the prior year that weren't purchased in last fiscal year, so those funds need to be transferred over to complete the purchase.
Now, if I can just clarify one thing, going back to our earlier conversation tonight. The 6 million general fund balance you're projecting, that's net of those.
Correct.
That we talked about. So you're accounting for them here.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So in uses, and some of these we had discussed during the safety enforcement area meeting. There was a TASER contract that had just been left out of the budget. In addition, looking at the fuel prices and what had been budgeted, it did warrant an increase. As a caveat, depending on what fuel prices do, I might be coming back in a future budget amendment requesting more money for that. We did our best to make an estimate this time. In addition, there was a settlement with VEC of $14,000, so that increase is just a one-time item. It was my feeling, let's just get that settlement paid off rather than dragging it out over a few years. In addition, the largest adjustments deal with vehicles, so there were increased costs of approximately $85,000. In addition, due to the vehicle production constraints, we are able to purchase a number of the vehicles we had budgeted in 24 and fiscal year 23, so that's $455. So that will reduce next year's budget, so it's just a timing issue. I mentioned that animal services vehicle, moving it from police to animal services, and then there was a price increase on the community services vehicle. In the ARPA fund, I won't spend too much time on this. It is allocating the full amount of the ARPA funds we received to storm drain projects, as had previously been discussed by the council. These numbers, we might need to do some amendments as time goes on and as contracts get solidified. This is our best estimate right now on where the budget needs to be placed, but my philosophy is any capital projects changes we will bring back to the council so you're aware if we're moving money between different budgets. In debt service fund, this one we had discussed at the prior meeting also. I did a full analysis of our fund balance in the debt service fund and discovered one, we had been over contributing impact fees into the fund for debt service. So it was just sitting in fund balance to be used against eligible debt service. In addition, we have about $1 million that is just unrestricted, and we do have an obligation for a widening project with state grant funds that had been received in 2019. This is just to move that $1 million over into capital projects to cover that. In the impact fee funds, these are mostly carryover projects. We did get a grant for the Juniper Canyon Recreation Area, so it is moving money into that fund. Road impact fee is very similar. So the one note here is, as I had mentioned in the debt service fund, I noticed we had over-transferred impact fee money for debt service. This is eliminating that transfer, so it does put more money in the road impact fee fund for impact fee eligible projects. Storm drain, we did have an agreement that needed to be budgeted that we will need to be paid out soon. So this just places the budget in the impact fee fund. And in general capital projects, we've discussed many of these items already. We did receive a corridor preservation grant from UDOT, so this budgets that money. It's offset, of course, as property purchase. I mentioned that debt service transfer to cover that obligation we have with grant money. This interest income of $210,000 really is going towards the Herriman Main Street widening project, which, as you know, was funded with bond proceeds. So as those funds sit in a construction account, they're accruing interest. We're allocating interest to that project through that. We have approximately $11.1 million in projects that were started last year that will be carried over. As had mentioned at the last meeting, there is a small parcel of UDOT property the city intends on purchasing. This proposal would be using fund balance to cover that. My feeling with it only being $52,000, our fund balance and capital projects could cover that. The last one, you're probably seeing that large $10.4 million number, thinking that that's crazy. This is really an accounting necessity. So as you know, we have an interfund loan between the Capital Projects Fund and then the Water Right Fund that was to cover a purchase of property in the Auto Mall a few years ago. The way the accounting works for an interfund loan, it actually creates a negative fund balance, and we had discussed this in the audit committee. What this transfer will do is write the fund balance number, so it won't be a deficit anymore. We won't have the finding. Once the loan's repaid, we will transfer the money back. So really, it is just an accounting mechanism to eliminate that deficit balance. And here in uses, as you can see, the majority of it is carryover of fund balance. We have received some grants and reimbursements, and those corridor preservations funds I had talked about. Down at the bottom, it does show how much we have in unrestricted funds in the capital projects fund, which is approximately 1.8 million down there at the bottom. Actually not finally, I've got a few more slides, unfortunately. I'm going as fast as I can. We do have a City Hall fund, which has been used to make improvements to the City Hall building as necessary. This was one of the items we had a fund budgetary compliance issue on, meaning we had spent more funds than we had budgeted. To avoid that in the future, I did just put a rather large number in there just to cover any purchases. We don't have plans to spend this $100,000. We've spent roughly $10,000 on improvements that were needed for City Hall, but there are no plans for that money. It's really just a budgetary compliance issue, so we don't have a finding on that. In the water fund, as we had mentioned at the discussion, one thing we hadn't been doing was budgeting our bond principal payments. It is allowed per GAAP to just directly credit or debit the liability, but good accounting policy and budgeting policy dictates that you would actually have this in your budget so you as a council could approve it, because technically, where it's not in the budget you approved, you technically didn't approve and authorize payment of the debt service. So this is just putting that principal payment in. As you can see, we do have a reimbursement agreement that we'll be paying soon, so that has been included in the budget. The water rights fund, so that's the other side of that transfer to eliminate that deficit fund balance. In the impact fee funds, I do just want to spend a minute here. As I had mentioned, there's a okay, I'll start over. Maybe then I can collect my thought. So with the bond we issued for the Zone 2 and 3 major water improvement projects, there is an impact fee eligible portion of that. The intention is to not use that for the project. However, with the volatility in construction pricing, although we got our Herriman Main Street project backed and it was great pricing, I did want to put this number in the budget just to show that if we need it, we do have it and we can have that discussion. So that is the main reason why, from a budget perspective, it does show a negative fund balance, but there's a good chance we won't use that $3.6 million. Also, with the Main Street widening, there is a portion of that is impact fee eligible. Engineering has included that as part of the project. However, as you know, the numbers came back very low, and we might not need to use the water fund portion of this. The bond should be able to cover everything unless they find some large contingency. However, for right now, I did leave it in the budget in case it was needed. And then stormwater, we did discuss last time there was a reimbursement agreement that the city is obligated to pay. However, staff has been looking at the agreement, and the amount right now we have to pay is significantly less than that. In addition, Public Works and Engineering have proposed a couple of different options of paying for this so that the stormwater fund doesn't come into a negative balance. My feeling is we needed to vet those out as staff a little bit more before we presented a proposal to you as council. So I did leave it in the budget, so if we do have to pay it before final decision's made, there is at least that project's been budgeted. And with that, are there any questions before the public hearing? Okay. Not as exciting as McKay, but I try.
We appreciate your work, Kyle. Okay, with that being said, we will move on to the public comment portion of that item. And at this point, we'll open for public comment. Seeing none, I'll look for a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Motion by Sherry.
Second.
Second by Jared. All in favor?
Aye.
Look for a motion on the resolution.
Motion to approve resolution number R03-2023, approving an amendment to the 2022-2023 fiscal year budget.
Motion by Steve. Second by Jared. Jared? Teddy? Yes. Sherry?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. That motion carries. Move on to the consent agenda and look for discussion or motion.
I'll motion to approve consent agenda as written.
Second.
Motion by Jared, second by Teddy. Jared?
Yes.
Teddy?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. Motion carries. Item 11.1, discussion and consideration of a request from Herriman 73 Partners, LLC, to amend the Herriman City zoning map for 8.23 acres. Property located at 124th South, Mtn View Corridor, from A143 to AMSD. Michael.
Good evening, council. As you have seen in the past, we have been seeing a series of incremental improvements and requests for development-related issues in the Auto Mall project. This is property that was recently required by the developer, and it was master planned for Auto Mall. This is the property in question. It was previously owned by UDOT. It was presumably acquired as part of the planning and development of the Mtn View Corridor. And whereas it's now surplus, there was an opportunity to purchase it and to fold it within this larger project. As you can see, it was zoned A143 currently, and the proposals changed that to the AMSD zone. Showing the AMSD area interrelated with some of the other MDA projects that are supporting or interrelated with this project. As you know, we look at issues dealing with whether or not a zoning request is in harmony with the character of the property in the vicinity, whether or not it would have an adverse effect on adjacent property, and whether or not there's adequate facilities and services to support the property. All of those staff found were favorable, and the Planning Commission held a public hearing on this on January 4th and recommended to the council that you would approve this zoning map amendment with a vote of 6-0. Any questions? The applicant is also being represented here by Julie Smith tonight if you do have any questions on the Auto Mall.
Nope, I think pretty straightforward. Look for a motion if no comments.
Motion to approve ordinance number 2023-02, authorizing an amendment to the zoning map for 8.23 acres of property located approximately 124th South, Mtn View Corridor, from A1-43 to AMSD Auto Mall Special District.
Second.
Motion by Jared, second by Sherry. Teddy?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes, that motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Julie. Item 11.2, discussion and consideration of proposed amendments to chapters 10.3, 10.16, and 10.25 of the Land Development Code and enacting Title 11 to define and regulate residential treatment facilities for the disabled. Todd? You go up there.
May I just say, while you're walking up here, this was some riveting reading. There was a lot of it.
There's a lot of it. 600 pages.
Hard time going to sleep last night.
We
and
weren't
this was the
lacking
solution.
information on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for letting me present to you tonight. I want to go over what are residential treatment facilities. So I'll kind of go over the laws generally and go over some of the changes that we made and explain some of those. So cities can enact zoning regulations and restrict or allow uses depending on the location or, we call them zones, and the type of use that's located therein. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination based on a person's disability. So we got to be careful when we create regulations that we are not making it more difficult for a disabled person to be in a zone. The United States Supreme Court has recognized that urban living or group living also causes group problems. There's a fine balance between regulating group living and discriminating against the disabled. So This text amendment, generally it repeals Chapter 25, which is what our current code, where that's located, and it creates Title 11. So we basically, we strike out one and we move it to a new place. There's a couple reasons for that. Mainly, the regulations regarding treatment facilities, they have a zoning aspect, but it's not a zoning issue, more or less. Because a lot of times we have issues with business licensing or how the process to request a reasonable accommodation. And if someone has issues with that, we don't need to have them go through an appeal process that's a land use decision, land use appeal process. So we revised the regulations to be compliant with federal and state laws. We added, removed, and updated definitions. We increased the number of permitted unrelated disabled persons to 8, and I'll go into that in the staff report. It has an analysis of why that is. We clarify the process to obtain a business license, and we updated the process for someone who's requesting a reasonable accommodation, which you can think this like a variance. Something in the code doesn't work for them, and they need to deviate that in some aspect. Under the laws, they call that a reasonable accommodation. So the specific text amendment overview is the prior code wasn't clear whether or not a business license would be required, and we clarified that it is required. We modified the reasonable accommodation process, which makes my life a lot easier. We require a lot more information to be provided to the city on why they need that reasonable accommodation or that deviation from code. And I've had a history of I'm not given very much information, so it's hard for me to determine whether what they're asking for is warranted under federal law or not. We require an application fee. There's briefing requirements, so they have to lay out their arguments, and I can agree or disagree with those arguments. And then we have a hearing outline process. And we have a decision outline and a deadline. So in other words, the hearing officer who makes the decision needs to specifically address certain federal issues that they're required to do.
To verify, that will be an outside person?
Yeah.
Not you, okay.
So right now, we have the Planning Commission make a decision on reasonable accommodations. In my experience, it's much better having a hearing officer who's trained, has expertise in this area of law, which is very nuanced, and it protects the city. I can make my arguments on what I believe the federal law supports, but ultimately, whatever decision is made is by someone that's not affiliated with Herriman. It's not a resident. It's not someone who might be politically motivated. And with the Planning Commission, they don't have the expertise. They might have a personal interest in it because it might be a neighbor. So we're just trying to avoid that issue. And that actually can really be detrimental to a city. In fact, there was a case out of Idaho where a county denied a reasonable accommodation. And I think the city council made the decision. And there was a lot of public at that meeting. And they made some of their decisions based on what was said during the meeting. Well, the county got sued, and so they filed a discrimination lawsuit. The county lost, went bankrupt because of that lawsuit.
Hearing officer it is.
And hearing officers have quasi-judicial immunity too. So we have some protection saying that we didn't make the decision. We didn't discriminate. This hearing officer made the decision just like a judge would, and you wouldn't file a lawsuit against a judge. And here's some of the benefits that I just talked about. Compliance with state and local laws. There was a couple things in our current code that did not meet the state and local laws as well as federal laws. And that the facility needs to comply with all these requirements. So the state has their requirements, which for a treatment facility, the state's not, they look at the operational standpoint and house size and if they have so many square feet per person. So the city isn't going to regulate any of that. But we are going to require that they have to comply with that state requirement, and if it ever gets revoked, then we have an opportunity to revoke their license because they're not compliant with what they need to be. One of the changes is that we're going to require half-mile distance between all group living arrangements, not just treatment facilities, but any type there's group living arrangements within a residential neighborhood. The purpose behind that is typically traffic and parking. What we don't want are two treatment facilities that might have a little bit more parking issues than your normal home, and then that street is burdened with more parking and traffic. They can ask for a deviation to this, and I've seen it in another city that I worked for, where there was another facility within a half mile, but it was on a different street that didn't have any egress or access to the street that this other facility was on. So that's a no-brainer for me that those concerns aren't there. But at least we put it in there, and they can ask for a deviation. We will allow, the proposed text is allowing an upward deviation to 8 non-related disabled persons to live within a home. If the state regulations allow for that, again, it goes back to the state regulations, looks at the house size, how many rooms there are, kitchens, that sort of thing. And if it allows, that home physically allows for 8 people, then we would, on a permitted use, allow for 8 people in the home. I have read dozens of articles that talk about treatment and how people recover, and they do better in group settings. And almost all the articles that I've read, there's a spot between 5 and 12, and typically 8 is that good medium because you have influx and people leaving and moving on. And with having an upward deviation, there's a hope that we get less requests to move from 5 to 8 or something like that.
Todd, can you clarify something?
Yeah.
In this presentation where you use the word disabled person, there's a connotation that there's a federal definition of that, right? In this case, you're talking about people that may be needing residential treatment for addiction recovery or other types of things.
Yep.
That's not necessarily disabled. Is that a legal classification that a person under treatment for addiction recovery is disabled?
That's a good question. So the Americans with Disability Act has the term that defines the word disabled. Right. And it has a whole host of things that if you meet this classification, then you're disabled under that definition. The Fair Housing Act calls it handicap, so it's essentially the same definition. But when they file an application, and one of the things that they need to do is specify how the clients at that facility are handicapped. And they can do that in a couple different ways. Typically, businesses come in and ask for an accommodation on behalf of their clients. And so they would need a criteria that shows that they will only accept people that classify as disabled or handicapped. And that can be done by having a medical physician write that criteria. And typically that's a pretty low bar. If you look at the list that's there, I think sleeping disorders classify people as disabled. So in these facilities, it's typically are alcohol and drug recovery, but it could be a whole set of other things too. Like with youth, because we have quite a few youth treatment facilities here in Utah.
Mental health issues,
mental health issues,
stuff, all kinds
exactly.
of things, right? Okay. I'm just clarifying the definition that we're talking about here, because I remember when I first read the disabled part, it didn't line up with what further clarification was. So yeah. Thank you.
I've had this be an issue in the past, this last bullet point, that the facility must maintain the residential characteristics. I had an assisted living facility approach, a prior city that I worked for. They wanted 200+ units, and it looked like a building that would house 200+ people. It did not have any residential characteristics, so we want to make sure that we have those in place and that they meet the zoning requirements such as setbacks and things like that. That's the end of the presentation. If you have any questions about the specific language that's in there, I'm happy to answer any of those. Otherwise,
No, I thought it was good. You did a good job. It was very thorough and well thought out, I thought.
thank you.
And these changes prescribed would be bringing us up to state statute and
Yeah.
compliant.
Yeah. I did have outside counsel review this. Dan McDonald, he's kind of the guy to go to in the western United States. He has an office here in Utah, but he does things around the United States. I've worked with him a lot on these type of issues, and so he made sure that everything's up to par.
Appreciate your work on it. That's a lot of work. Thank you, Todd.
Refreshingly absent of
Gee. Okay, without further comment, I'll look for a motion on 11.2.
Motion to approve ordinance number 2023-03, authorizing an amendment to chapters 10-3, 10-16, and 10-25 of the Land Development Code and enacting Title 11 to define and regulate residential treatment facilities for the disabled.
Motion by Steve,
Second.
second by Sherry. Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Teddy?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our regular meeting tonight. Future meetings, next planning meeting is February 1st, 2023. Our next city council meeting is February 8th. February 8th, there's also a senior bingo event here at 10 o'clock at City Hall. RSVP is required. Do we have a close tonight? I know we're not going back into close, but we do have close tonight. Okay. I will look for a motion to adjourn city council and go to back to work meeting.
So moved.
Motion by Steve?
Second.
Second by Teddy. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.